She puts the figure at 85% approximately.
Wow.
In prisons have got ADHD. I've been speaking to a counsellor this week who's been working at HMP Bullingdon and some other prisons in Buckinghamshire. She says 100% everybody she's worked with has been ADHD. When I was in the prisons, I always used to say it was 8 or 9 out of 10 had ADHD. And in the young offender units, it's more. It's potentially all of them in young offender units.
Hello and welcome to the ADHD Untangled podcast. My name is Rosie and I have ADHD. And like many other ADHDers, the majority of my life has felt chaotic to say the very least, due to what I describe as having a tangled brain. Let's get untangled and show the world what we are made of. Trigger warning. The Untangled podcast does cover some sensitive topics that could be triggering to some. So please be sure to read the full description before listening in. Please note that the majority of the guests on the Untangled podcast do have ADHD, including myself. Which means we will interrupt each other, forget what we're saying, and go off topic. Hello and welcome to episode number 1 of season 2. I am so excited to be back. I have missed you guys. And today we are kicking off with Sarah Templeton, who is a complete superstar. You won't hear me say much on this episode because I was lost for words. Sarah works in our criminal justice system and has been doing so for around 20 years. And she is now an ADHD coach. And she found out whilst working within the prisons that she also had ADHD. Sarah is doing some of the most incredible work I've ever heard of in our space. She is fighting for screenings in prisons. She's fighting for screenings in police stations, which looks like it's about to happen in about 12 months' time. She's also wrote many books, one of them which will help teachers understand how to look out for ADHD. She is an absolute superstar, and honestly, I'm honestly blown away by her work, her passion, and she is really, really out there acting on making change happen. She's also in talks with Parliament about the ADHD Act. She is all over it, and I really feel like she is making some real big progress. You are going to really, really be inspired by Sarah's story and her insights. She states that she thinks if we can get screenings in prisons for ADHD and the people can get the treatment that they need, that we would need half the prisons that we have now. Now, can you imagine what domino effect that would have on the country? So think of the victims, think of the pressure on the NHS, think of the amazing success stories that could come from those who are treated for their ADHD in prisons. Sarah's seen it firsthand. She's had people come out and become doctors, lawyers, you name it. Their lives have turned around, and this is going to be an episode that blows your mind. So let's get untangled and show the world what we are made of.
Hi, my name is Sarah Templeton and I'm a qualified counsellor, coach and CBT therapist, and I live in High Wycombe in Buckinghamshire. And about 2.5, 3 years ago, I decided to write a book because I was saying the same thing over and over to parents, which was how to understand their ADHD kids' brains. And a lot of parents were saying to me, if only I'd known this stuff when they were growing up, my life and their life would have been so different. So I wrote a book that came out in April 2020. And it's called How Not to Murder Your ADHD Kid. Instead, Learn to Be a Child's Own ADHD Coach. And I kind of thought that would sell to parents. I was my clients' parents. That was who it was aimed at. But actually, it's gone on to sell all over the world. And it now sells 5 times as much in America as it does in England, which just blows my mind because that was never on my radar at all. But it sells all over the world, Canada, Australia, a lot of the English-speaking countries, but also Europe, France, Germany, Belgium, they all buy it as well. And then what happened was a lot of parents were giving that book to their children's teachers to help the teachers understand their children's brains. So after about 6 months of me hearing all these parents everywhere, literally in Australia, America, saying, we've given it to our sons or daughters' parents, I said, wait, sorry, to the teachers. I said, wait. If you're giving it to teachers, I can put more in it that will be of benefit to teachers. So I rewrote it for teachers, and that came out in December last year. And that's also selling extremely well. So, which thrills me, because every time I think, that's another class load of kids helped. Every time a teacher buys it, in theory, they could be passing it to other teachers in the school.
Yeah.
That could be an awful lot of children who are helped just by one teacher's book being sold. And that sells every day on Amazon as well. The first one sells 20 or 30 copies every single day on Amazon. The teachers one sells between 5 and 10 copies every day on Amazon. So they're both selling massively. And what I really want them to be is stocked in bookshops. We're on the way to getting them stocked in Waterstones, hopefully, because my books are kind of different to other people's, only because they're written from my own brain. So I've not got a PhD. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm just a humble counsellor who happens to know ADHD very well, because I've worked with hundreds of ADHD clients, and I've got a moderate to severe combined ADHD brain myself. So when I wrote the book, I literally wrote it as like Mrs. Joanna Public. This is what ADHD is. This is what it feels like to have it. This is all the problems it brings. This is all the brilliant stuff it brings. And it's very, very down to earth, because I can only be down to earth. I'm not an academic at all, So that's why the book apparently has appealed to parents, because they can tell that I'm just normal. I'm just Sarah from Wickham, who happens to have ADHD and happens to want to be able to tell them how their kids' brains works. So I'm not Dr. So-and-so or PH so-and-so, or, I'm none of them. I stopped at O levels, I'm not even a graduate. I didn't even go to university. I didn't even do A levels. So I'm just a very standard person who understands ADHD, and I don't talk about it medically because I don't understand it medically. I gave up science at 13. I'm not interested in science. But what I am interested in is people understanding their own brains and parents understanding their kids' brains. That's what I'm passionate about. And as you just said, focusing it in the right direction, because once you understand the ADHD and there's going to be negatives with it, that's a given, but there's also a lot of positives, and if you hone in on those positives and you use those positives, you will be extremely successful. And that's what I like to try and communicate with parents, that don't expect your kids to be good all-rounders. They're not going to be. They're not going to get A or B for every single subject, because some of them they're going to hate or despise, or they're going to have comorbidities like me and my dyscalculia. That means me and maths were never going to get on. But, I got an A for English because words are my thing.
Yeah.
So once parents understand that, just don't expect your kids to be brilliant at everything. It's not going to happen. But let them focus on what they're passionate about, and you will be very surprised how well they'll do if they're passionate about it.
There's so much I want to say on that. Is firstly, massive congratulations on writing,
Thank
a book
you.
that seems to be really relatable and easy for parents to understand. And I think it's being shown so much as well, the authenticity and being able to explain something so complex, because ADHD is complex in so many ways, and being able to simplify that for others who are living with it or got children that are living with it is a real talent and a real I suppose superpower, if you would call it. What you're doing is a really impactful thing. So that's amazing to hear, that you're getting the word out, and it's really helping people.
Can I just tell you the other main reason I wrote the book is that I'm an ex-prison counsellor, and I'd worked in 4 prisons, 2 young offender units and 4 adult male prisons. And I'd realised that nearly all, if not all, these people I was working with were ADHD. The prisons are absolutely rammed with ADHD. And the other reason I wrote the book was because I thought, if I can get to the parents when these kids are younger, so that the parents can understand their brains when they're 9, 10, 11, 12, when they first start getting into trouble or doing anything faintly naughty, if I can get the parents on side and not taking up an oppositional stance, if I can get the parents to understand their brains and get them to do all the risk-taking, thrill-seeking, pushing boundary stuff, but legally, and get it through sport, all sorts of drama, singing, dance, loads of ways you can get your adrenaline that's legal. And if the parents understand that needing adrenaline and needing exciting stuff is part of ADHD, but you can do that in a way that doesn't get you into trouble with the law. So that's another reason why I wrote the books. I thought if these parents understand, yeah, these kids are going to want, to be outside all the time and doing stuff all the time and be energetic and pushing boundaries and having excitement. But if you channel that in a way that is positive and non-criminal, we can half empty the young offender units. That's the other reason I wrote the book, to keep these kids out of prison. They don't need to be in prison. The vast majority of these ADHD teenagers, they don't need to be there.
Let's start with that, because this is what we all want to learn more about. First of all, what are the facts about ADHD showing up in the prison space? Because I always, I've had loads of conversations with all different types of people, and it always comes up saying that, the government are mad to not invest in ADHD diagnosis because they'll be saving so much money. And one of the reasons is because, they're saying we take up a lot of people that are in the prison system, right? But no one seems to know the exact data. Like I was told 1 in 4 people, and someone said to me that's much more. Yes.
Yeah.
So firstly, like, what are the facts? And how bad are we talking? Like, how is it showing up? Like,
right. Let me give you a couple of facts from people who actually have worked in prisons.
Yeah.
There's a mental health nurse who's worked in the prisons for 20 years. She's ADHD. Yeah. She knows what she's looking for. She puts the figure at 85% approximately in prisons have got ADHD. I've been speaking to a counsellor this week who's been working at HMP Bullingdon and some other prisons in Buckinghamshire. She says 100% everybody she's worked with has been ADHD. When I was in the prisons, I always used to say it was 8 or 9 out of 10 had ADHD. And in the young offender units, it's more. It's potentially all of them in young offender units. As you get older and you get some more sophisticated sort of crime, let's say blue collar crime, that tends to not be ADHD people. But the young offenders are full of people who've done risk taking, thrill seeking, pushing boundaries, got into a lot of fights, been done for a fray, nicking cars. Real ADHD minor stuff, just risk-taking, thrill-seeking stuff. So in prisons, how does it present? It's all over the place. It's chock-a-block, and that includes women's prisons. There's a very small percentage of women in prison. It's something like 5% of the prison population is female. But every female prisoner I've worked with and met has also been ADHD. So must not forget them. We mustn't forget them. But there's only 5%. The 95% who are male, the vast majority are ADHD. However, in prison, what happens is a lot of the psychiatrists, psychologists, mental health people, well-being people, drugs therapists, all the people in prisons, they're not educated in ADHD. So what happens at the vast majority, there's the odd one that is, but the vast majority aren't. So what happens is people get misdiagnosed in prison more than anywhere else. And what they get diagnosed with is personality disorders. I actually did some training a couple of weeks ago for 120 probation officers. And I said to them at the beginning, I said, what do you think people get diagnosed with in prison when actually it's ADHD? And the whole room straight away said personality disorders. They know that that's what they're getting diagnosed with in prison. If you watch TV shows on people who've come out of prison, they'll say, oh, I'm diagnosed with emotionally unstable personality disorder, or I'm diagnosed with histrionic personality disorder. And you think, no, you're not, love, you're ADHD. But they've been given that diagnosis in prison for 2 reasons. Number 1 reason is, as I say, lack of education. People aren't trained to spot ADHD. But also number 2, you don't medicate a personality disorder. You have to medicate ADHD. So they choose not to diagnose because they don't have to medicate, and it costs money to medicate.
Yeah.
So, and also in prison, ADHD meds have street value because they are in effect speed. So a lot of boys, the vast majority of boys that go into prison who are on ADHD meds get taken off them. Now there are pockets of prisons where I know they keep them on their ADHD meds, but every prison I've worked in, they've taken them off their ADHD meds, straight off, because they know that they've got value inside prison. So what happens then is the boys who are not on the ADHD meds in prison, they get into trouble and they get called what's called in prison nickings. Yeah, they get nicked for things. So what that means is they've been rude to an officer, they've punched a wall, they've done something they shouldn't have done. And all those nickings extend their days. They get given extra days for however many nickings they get. And this is why ADHD people end up being in prison for longer, because they're not given their meds in prison. They're locked up for 23 hours a day. Can you imagine doing that to an ADHD person, putting them in a room on their own for 23 hours a day? That is standard, and they're allowed out for 1 hour. There are exceptions, but that's standard. These boys, by the time they come out for that hour, they are exploding. They are bored stupid in their cells. They've got so much restlessness and needing to get out and do something. Probably do come out and kick somebody or punch something or throw something, and then they get a nick in, so they get more days in jail. This is the revolving door of crime. And when with ADHD, when they're not diagnosed and medicated, they are going to end up in prison for longer. And also, when they come out, they're going to go back in quick, because as soon as they come out, when they come out of prison, the prisons don't give them any support. So they come out, they've not got their meds. Most of them have got nowhere to live. I've known boys who've not even made it to probation. When they come out of prison, they have to go to probation that first day. I've known numerous ADHD boys not even make it to probation because they haven't got the money to get there. They get lost. A lot of them have got dysgraphia, dyscalculia. They're not used to trains and buses and things. They miss that first appointment with probation and they get put back in prison because they can't organise themselves to get to probation. Their ADHD impacts at every stage, before, during and after prison. It impacts, and that's why tons and tons of them end up back in prison. I had one, a classic one. He actually rang me up. I was in bed with the flu, bad flu. I really couldn't move out of the bed. And he rang me up and went, Sarah, I've just got out of prison and I'm at the train station and I've got to get to, I can't remember which town he'd got to get to, but he'd got to get somewhere to probation. And he said, can you come and get me or I'm not going to make it? I said, I can't, honey. I just literally can't even get out of bed, let alone drive. I've got the proper flu. Is there anybody else that can take you? There wasn't. He ended up back in prison. And I ended up going back in to visit him, because he couldn't get to probation. So the officers in prison will tell you that they set the boys up to fail. And it's very true. They do. Because ADHD boys, when they come out, in particular, if they haven't got family support, and a lot of them haven't, because their parents are ADHD, so a lot of them have been put in care or adopted or fostered or whatever. So a lot of them haven't got the parental support. And they come out and they're on their own and they are clueless. And they end up getting put back in prison. It's tragic. The whole thing is not organised well. It doesn't suit ADHD people.
I'm honestly speechless. Honestly, like I can't. It all makes so much sense, and it's tragic, isn't it? It's like
it is a very big tragedy. And this is what I keep telling people. I mean, there is a positive, and I'll tell you all the positives we're doing.
Yeah.
But I have. It is a scandal what is going on at the moment with ADHD in prisons, an absolute scandal. And the government know about it. We've got some MPs who are massively on side, and we're working with some MPs because they realise that this is disgraceful. They are locking up people with the most treatable mental health condition there is, because ADHD medication is the most efficacious of any medication.
Yeah.
They're not giving these boys these meds. Here's a quick story for you. I had a boy who I'd worked with in HMP Portland, and he was about 32, 33 at this point. He'd been in and out of prison all his life. When he was out of prison, I realised this time, because I'd now got my ADHD diagnosis, and I suddenly thought, my God, he's screaming ADHD, this boy, but I just didn't realise before. I rang his probation and I said, look, it's your job to keep him out of prison and to stop him offending. I'm telling you, he is very, very severely ADHD. That's what the problem is. And the probation officer thanked me. She said, Sarah, you're the only person who's rung up here in 20 years with anything faintly useful. Thank you for that. So what they did, a little bit off the scale, not off the scale, but not really accepted. She had some ADHD medication and she gave it to this boy. And he was on it for 2 weeks, and he rang me up in the middle of it and he said, Sarah, he said, I can't guarantee this, but I think if I'd been on ADHD meds all my life, I'm pretty sure I wouldn't have committed any of those crimes because I feel completely different. And that's the difference it makes. And yet he was 32, 33. He'd been in prison off and on since he was about 16, more in than out. But when he was on those meds, he said, I feel so differently. What he meant was his brain felt so different. Yeah. He didn't think he would have committed any of his crimes.
He had the clarity and the noise has been quietened down. And
And he didn't feel the
this
need
could change so much. Like, this could change everything, you know, like all the crime and all the bad stuff that's going on.
Yes, and what you have to think about as well
is through the cycle.
What you have to think about is the victims of crime as well.
Yeah, this is what I mean.
You know, people who are getting their houses robbed, people who are being mugged. You know, a lot of it is, and also you've got to remember the addiction link with ADHD.
Yes, big addiction link.
Yeah, so if people are undiagnosed ADHD and they're addicted to whatever, mine was food and shopping, but for a lot of people it's alcohol, drugs, gambling, whatever.
All of it sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely, loads of things. So a lot of the time, those boys are robbing or nicking, thieving, stealing, mugging, whatever.
Yeah.
You've got to think about the victims of crime here as well. If we were actually diagnosing and medicating all these boys and catching them early, which is what we're doing, I'll tell you about that in a minute, that these boys, if you catch them early, not only are you changing their life, but you are protecting the general public. They are going yeah. So and also you're saving the government a fortune because these prisons are packed with ADHD. Yeah. So all this building of new prisons, it's an utter waste of time. What they need to do is screen and test everybody they've already got in prison, get them on the right medication, and then when they get out, they won't need to go back. So every time I read about that building a massive, I think, oh, for goodness sake, stop. Just do what needs to be done, which is test all these boys in the young offender units in the prisons for ADHD, get them on the right medication, get them out of prison, and then we will need literally maximum half the prison space we've got. Half, minimum. Even the last report the Ministry of Justice did, which came out, I think, last year, I think it was something last July, even they are now saying we believe up to 50% of the prison population is neurodiverse. So even the government, the Ministry of Justice, are saying we believe it's up to 50%. Yeah, those of us in the know, those of us who've worked in there, we believe it's more. But at least we've got the government shifted from this ridiculous 25% figure, and they're now saying it can be up to half. Yes, you're getting closer, still not there, but closer. So there's loads going on. Do you want me to tell you what's going on to change this?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I did a talk about, nearly a year ago now, for the Metropolitan Police. They have something called the ADHD Alliance, and they do training, sort of Zoom support group type meetings. And they asked me to speak at one. When they sent out the invitation nationwide, 440 police officers signed up. Now, the vast majority of those police officers signed up were either ADHD or have got ADHD kids, members of the family, and they know already that a lot of the people they're arresting are ADHD. So I did my talk on ADHD in the criminal justice system, and then a lot of those police forces, I think we're up to about 12 now, have contacted either or me and said, we want to start screening in police stations. This has got to stop. This is ridiculous. So what we are doing, me and about 10, 12 police forces all over the country, right down from Avon and Somerset is one of them, right up to Cumbria is another one. So dotted all around the country, these different police forces, they're going to start screening in police stations because they know, and we've spoken to the two biggest ADHD right to choose providers, which is Psychiatry UK and ADHD 360. And they have said that if there's somebody who has committed a crime and the diagnosis is going to impact their process through the criminal justice system, they can get them diagnosed within 1 to 2 weeks. So so we can do that for people that are at risk of being criminalized rather than medicalized. So that's what we're doing now. So we are literally starting 2 trials. We're doing 2 pilot schemes, one with the City of London Police and one with Cumbria Police. And within the next week, 10 days maximum, both of them are starting pilot schemes where they are going to screen every single person that comes into a police station. When we've got those figures, we'll be going straight to the government and saying, right, this is what's going on in your police stations. We need that rolled out across the whole police force. I'm passionate about the prisons. I still want everybody tested in prison because there are a lot of people sitting in prison now with ADHD. And a lot of people don't know, but in prisons, when you first go into prison or you move prison, and they move people around prisons a lot,
Yeah.
The very first thing you have to do is go on an induction wing. Now you're on this induction wing for 2 weeks, and each time you're tested for your literacy, your numeracy, your eyesight, your hearing, all of that. But the one thing they're not testing them for is the one thing they've nearly all got, which is ADHD. So we want them tested on induction wings, and I'm still pushing for that. But we're not getting so much support from the prison service, basically because they're very understaffed and overrun. I understand that.
Yeah.
But we're getting a lot of support from the police, because the police are realizing that they're ADHD themselves, a lot of these police people, because they like the adrenaline, they've got extra compassion.
Yeah, of course.
People. So the police is packed with ADHD. And because of that, they are helping us massively with this screening in police stations. And as soon as we can prove to the government it's either, I don't know, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 out of 10, whatever it is, a screening high for ADHD, that's when we want them to roll it out amongst the whole of the police force. And I think that will happen. I would say that will happen within the next year, absolute tops.
That was going to be my next question. When do you think that will happen?
Well, with the pilots are starting, as I say, in the next week to 10 days. We've got a meeting with one of the MPs who's very passionate about this. His name's Robert Buckland. He used to be the Minister for Justice, and he's got an ADHD son. Mm-hmm. And he's very, very, very passionate about getting everybody in the criminal justice system screened for ADHD. So he and me have got an appointment with him at the Houses of Parliament in the middle of May. And we'll be presenting these pilot scheme figures to him in the middle of May, and then we move this forward. So we've got all the right people on side. You know, we've got absolutely brilliant MPs. We've got neuroconsultants, psychiatrists. We've got a 150 strong working party putting together an ADHD Act, which we actually want as well. And that will include screening, training and screening in schools, because schools is another area which is just appalling. You know, it's not teachers' fault that teachers are not trained either in ADHD, ASD, dyslexia, dysgraphia, dyspraxia. Half of them don't even know what these conditions are. They don't even know that dyslexia, dyspraxia, dyscalculia, dysgraphia are comorbidities of ADHD. Nobody's told them that. So a lot of them will think, well, that kid might have dyslexia. They will never think, I wonder if that's because they've got ADHD. I've yet to meet anybody in 10 years of working with thousands of clients. I've never met anybody with dyslexia who's not also got ADHD. Mm-hmm. So
very big crossover, isn't it?
Massive, yeah. So one of the things that we want the ADHD Act, we've got about 10 or 12 different areas where we know that change needs to happen. The big one is the criminal justice system. Equally big is the education system. They're the top two. But also we've got counselling and psychotherapy training. It's not included in counselling and psychotherapy training, and it needs to be, because ADHD people on the whole will suffer with either anxiety and or depression. Where are they going to go? They're going to go and see a counsellor. Counsellors need to be trained in what ADHD is, how to spot it. Children's services is another big one. So social workers, people working in adoption, fostering. We actually had an organisation call us the other day from Wales. They have 250 fostering families, and they want us to go and train all these fostering families in ADHD, which is great. But it should have been done before they were allowed to foster kids, because most of these kids have been removed from households that have got undiagnosed ADHD in them, because kids are usually removed from households where there's alcoholics, drug addicts, chaotic living, neglect, abuse, and very often that's because the parents are undiagnosed ADHD. Not always, but very often. Mm-hmm. So very often these kids that are being fostered and put into care are ADHD. There was a paper written about a year ago. I worked this out about 5 years ago, but then somebody way cleverer than me wrote a paper about a year ago saying that the ratio of ADHD in fostered and adopted kids was much, much higher. I knew that working in the prisons, because working in the prisons, a lot of the kids have come from the care system. And when you talk, one of my very first clients in Portland, he was 26, both his parents were dead because they were, his mother was an alcoholic, his father was an alcoholic and a drug addict. And they were both screaming, that they had 6 children, all of whom were ADHD. So I'm completely convinced the parents were both ADHD, but by the time this boy was 26, both his parents were dead because of undiagnosed ADHD. It's tragic. With the ADHD Act, we've got a lot of different areas. Addiction is another area. Addiction rehabs, gambling rehabs. Because in gambling rehabs, I've had a lot of arguments with staff in gambling rehabs who will accept that somebody's ADHD, but they won't accept that's responsible for their gambling habit. They don't understand the connection between the compulsive brain, the ADHD compulsions, and gambling. I had one client who went to a gambling specific rehab. It was a 12-week course, but he said after 8 weeks he had to leave. He said, I left Sarah, not because I wasn't committed, and I still am committed, and I don't think he's gambling to this day, but he couldn't deal anymore with the staff not understanding how his ADHD was connected to his gambling habit. They just didn't get it, So rehabs and gambling organisations, another big chunk of who we want change. But there's a lot of different areas where we believe ADHD people can be caught early and stopped from going down these, addiction, criminal pathways.
I think I said to you, we had Bambos on, he's the chair of the APPG. Yes. And I think being one voice is what I was talking to someone in the US the other day, and they said becoming one voice is the most powerful thing you can do, all coming together and making that change. But he was saying that that's what he went to visit a prison during one of his, when he was going around on a tour of the UK, and some of the devastating the most devastating stories he saw within the prisons were the ones that had been diagnosed with ADHD, and it could have been prevented. Like, one was a car accident where he killed his two friends, and he'd obviously been put in prison for that, but it was as an accident, but for reckless driving and what have you. Yeah. And it's such a tragedy. But he was saying about prevention as well, and he said the thing is, we don't want them to even get to that point. We want it to be a prevention, as opposed to, obviously at the moment it's such a crisis that we need to be treating people that are there, but also thinking about the future and thinking about how do we prevent this before it even happens.
We prevent it by screening them young, and this is what we want. We want them screened literally when they start school, when they very first start school. I've got one of my ex-prison boys has got a 4-year-old daughter. She's very, very severely ADHD. I saw them last night. When they took her to the preschool, they said to the preschool, "We think she's ADHD," because both the parents are. The school went, "No, we don't go with that here. She's just a little girl to us." Well, already this 4-year-old has been on the timeout steps twice. Once because she wasn't listening, because her brain had gone somewhere else, and once because she was flailing her arms about, and by accident she hit somebody, because she's very, very hyperactive, this child. So screening literally at preschool, that's what needs to happen, because it's very obvious sometimes that parents know children are ADHD for the age of about 2. They know if the child's different to the other children. So screening in preschool, screening at school. I mean, a lot of people are saying we want screening at 5, 7, 11, 15, 17, before you move to to the next sort of section. So if we were screening all those times, and I'm say screening, it takes 5 minutes to fill one of these forms in. And if you score high enough, hello, that's the flagged up ones. That's the ones that go for more. But these are free. These are bits of paper that take 5 minutes to screen. So if it happens in the schools, our aim is that, and then if we catch those that haven't been picked up through school, if we can catch them in the police stations, which is what we're aiming to do, we can then catch them before prison. Because to be quite honest, once you go to prison, I've worked in enough prisons to know, once you go into prison, all you do is you meet other criminals. And of course, other criminals are very exciting, because they're doing all these naughty things and all these exciting things and all these things you haven't thought of. So when you're ADHD, you get dragged into stuff. People come out of prison much more wise criminals than when they went in.
My friend John always says that. Always says, well, it's like networking, isn't it? It's like you're going in with all other people that,
100%.
It can give you access to all different things.
Yeah, I worked with one boy who was in there for violence, came out a hardened drug dealer, because he'd met loads of drug dealers, and they put this wonderful plan into place of how they were going to do it when they got out. He'd never drug dealt in his life, but he became one in prison, because that's all the people that he met, So
it's not set up for people to reform, is it? And it's like,
no, not at all. And
can I just ask you where you come into this? So, like, if this is what we're dealing with, and we've got these prisons that aren't really setting them up for success, and they're not getting the support they need, where do you come into this? Like, how is someone like you how do you get access to these people and then be able to help them if no one else is really interested?
Through lots of ways. Basically, I qualified as a counsellor in 2015. Then I qualified as a CBT therapist in 2016. Set up my own website, put on their ADHD, and then from that, I won't bore you with the whole story, but we're now the biggest team of ADHD diagnosed therapists in the country. There are 80 of us, just going up to 90. So we're the biggest team of ADHD diagnosed.
Do your counsellors or coaches, sorry, did you say?
Nearly all counsellors, but some coaches.
Okay, right.
And they're all diagnosed ADHD themselves.
Yeah.
Some of them also diagnosed ASD, and a lot of them with dyslexia, dyscalculia, dyspraxia, all of it going on. So from that, we then set up a charity called ADHD Liberty. Now, ADHD Liberty, are pretty obvious from the title. It's all about keeping people out of prison, ADHD people out of prison. So we have a charity, and I also run a support group. So how have we got involved? I've got involved through my charity, through my team, because we've got a second company called Head Stuff ADHD Liberty. Head Stuff ADHD Liberty, what we do is we try and keep ADHD people out of prison. So we work a lot with solicitors, barristers, and we aim to get the case dropped by the CPS. So we will always write a report for whichever, it's usually children, it's usually teenagers, adolescents, but we do it for adults as well. We will write a report on their ADHD and all the traits that affect them. And then we write a report on how their ADHD has impacted the crime. Now, if they are not diagnosed or not medicated, that counts as mitigating evidence, medical mitigating evidence. And we've managed to have every single case so far thrown out of court. Sometimes it doesn't even get to court. Sometimes the CPS drop it because they know that it's not going to stand up in court because it's a medical, it's a medical reason. So that I've become very passionate. I became passionate. I stopped working in the prisons in 2016. And I swore then that I would make it my life's vocation to get those boys screened and assessed for ADHD, because I was leaving tens of thousands of them behind in prison that were ADHD. And I was diagnosed by then. I was diagnosed in 15 and this was 2016. So I've spent my life since raising ADHD awareness about the amount of people in prison and trying to do something about it. Now, ironically, the biggest thing that's happened is the police getting involved. And this always makes me laugh, because if I asked all those boys back in prison who were ADHD, and masses of them I still keep in touch with, if I'd have asked them, who do you think is going to help you most on the outside? The last people on the list would be the police. But it is the police. It is the police.
Because ADHD affects everyone. And this is what we're saying. It's like, it's across the board. So you will find people in every pocket that have been affected, either directly or through family or whatever it is.
Absolutely.
You will always be able to get someone who understands what you're going through and what
100%,
who wants to help.
So I've just got a very big mouth, and also my trait, my ADHD trait of always knowing best, wanting everything my own way, and also my heightened sense of justice is very strong. And it is very, very wrong that a lot of these boys in prison, that on the whole, they are not rapists, they're not murderers, they are in there for silly things, lots and lots of silly things. Here's a brilliant example for you. One boy I was working with in Portland, he was in there for nicking 1,000 cars, right? He was about 25, 26, I think. And I said to him, be honest with me. I said, when you nicked that very last car, did it enter your head that it might not be such a good idea and you might end up back in here? And he thought about it. And he said, honest to God, Sarah, he said, no. He said, I walked past that car and he said, I tried the door handle like I always do, and it was open. And he said, and then I looked inside and the keys were in the ignition. He said, what was I supposed to do? What else was I supposed to do? And that's the sort of reason a lot of those boys are in prison. Silly, nicking cars, getting into fights, a fray. It's tons and tons of that stuff. On the whole, I know there are exceptions, but on the whole, they are not your rapists, your murderers, your armed robbers. They're in there for repeated tons and tons and tons of silly things.
Chasing dopamine, like everyone with ADHD, just in a different way.
Absolutely.
When you said about we can get it taken out of court if we can prove, that it's ADHD at times. Mm-hmm. So if that happens and they haven't been diagnosed before that moment, and then you manage to get them diagnosed within those few weeks, then what would be the process after that? Would they get treatment as well when they come out? And would they be watched and looked out for and supported?
I'll give you a very good example. There's a boy who comes to our support group now who had been in prison 15 times. He was 29. When he got arrested again, I said to his mother, please let me see that boy. I swear there's ADHD. You don't go to prison 15 times before the age of 29 if you're not ADHD.
Yeah.
I then saw him severely ADHD. When I said to him, why has this never come up? Why have you ever been seen by prison mental health service or anything? And he actually said to me, he says, Sarah, he said, I'm not stupid. He said, I could deal with prison. I couldn't deal with being in a nut house. He didn't want to be put in a psychiatric unit. So all the stuff going on in his head, he'd kept it to himself. But when I kept saying to him, but I do all this, everything you're talking about, I do it as well. And he went, really? Yeah. So I'm not mad? I went, no, I promise you, I'm exactly the same. I do all this. So it all came spilling out. Now, we got him diagnosed. It must have been pushing on for a year ago now. That boy has been working ever since. He's been working. He's committed no crime in that time. And he's back in court in April. And his solicitor is allowing me to speak to the judge. And I will, hopefully, if I do it well, because I haven't on every other occasion, I will get that judge to see that that boy has been horrendously let down by the education system and the prison system, because somebody should have picked up his very severe ADHD. When I took him, my charity paid for him to be diagnosed. When I took him for the diagnosis, at the end of it, the psychiatrist sort of showed me the forms. He said, look at that, Sarah, look at that. Well, I've got dyscalculia, so I can't read forms at all. I said, what am I looking at? What are you telling me? He said, I'm showing you one of the most severe cases of ADHD I've ever seen in my life. And yet that boy had been in prison 15 times and nobody had picked it up. He was also a prolific self-harmer. So he'd been sat in front of nurses, doctors, a lot. Nobody had picked up his very obvious ADHD. But now he's on the meds, he's fine. Living with his girlfriend, got a little 2-year-old daughter and a baby daughter, very happy, very settled, not drinking anymore. He used to be a big drinker. Now he's not drinking, doesn't need the adrenaline because he's getting it from the meds. And as far as I know, in the last year and a half, he's not committed one crime. So all he's got hanging over him is this court appearance in April. The solicitor's already said that I can speak for him. I can speak to the judge and explain what's been going on, why he committed crime before, why he's not now. And I will do my damnedest to keep that boy out of prison. That's what I spend my life doing now, keeping ADHD people out of prison.
Your work is the most powerful work I think I have ever heard in my life. Like, this is
I'm dealing
incredible.
with real people. I deal with real people because I'm, as I said to you at the beginning, I'm down to earth. I get on very well with ADHD teenagers who are pushing back, who hate their mothers, who hate school. I understand it because I was like that. I hated my mother. I hated school. I hated everything. I get it. I understand them. But once I say, you can be full of all that hatred and you can still use it positively. I'm full of hate. I'm still full of hatred now. I hate the fact that they're not being assessed for ADHD. I hate the fact that teachers aren't being trained for it. I'm passionate, but I use that passion for change, for good, to help these people. And that's what a lot of my clients are doing now. A lot of one of my clients, for example, who was 13 when he was arrested for armed robbery, is now at university training to be a lawyer because he wants.
This was a story I wanted to talk to you about. This was one of the questions I've got is some showing us some of the success stories, because there was a lawyer, there was a chef. You said, wasn't there? Some people came out.
There's a chef. There's a doctor. I've got clients at the moment. One of them is training to be a doctor. He'd been arrested either twice or 3 times, but he managed to get off with cautions. He's now in his 4th or 5th year of training to be a doctor. Very bright boy.
Yeah.
The boy that was arrested for armed robbery at 13. He is now at university. He did brilliant in his A-levels, and he's now at university, and he wants to be a lawyer to help ADHD people. Another one, this is one of my favourite stories. I had a boy who was 14 when he came to me, diagnosed with everything. Well, he was diagnosed with ADHD and dyspraxia, I think, but we worked out he'd also got ASD, he'd also got dyscalculia, he'd got quite a few things going on. His school had written him off. If he believed what his school said, he was stupid, thick, gormless, hopeless, and he was on the road to nowhere. That's the message he was getting. When he came to me, his one passion was football, right? Absolutely loved football. And he kept saying, but I'm not good enough to be professional. I said, well, so what? If your passion's football, let's get you working, in the bloody coffee shop or in the shop that sells the T-shirts. If you want to be in and around football, just let's push and push and push. Well, his mum messaged me one day and she said, right, there's a trial for a local football team. She was very negative, the mum, very negative. She said, he won't get in. And I said, well, wait a minute. Shall we just see if we can actually get him to go to the trial? So when I spoke to him, and he said, oh, but I'm crap and I'll be rubbish and all the rest of it. And I said, you won't know that. I said, you don't actually know that because you've done the trial. If you go to the trial and you're rubbish and they say you're rubbish, right, we know you're rubbish, and then we can focus you in something else to do with football.
Yeah.
But, let's go and find out if you're rubbish or how rubbish you are, shall we? And he said, I'll go if you come with me. So he was 15. I said to his mum, he said he'll go if I come with him. She said, okay, let's go. So we went. It was the most hideous night of my life in one respect, that it was pissing with rain. It was his mum bought me a cup of tea, which got stone cold because it rained in my tea straight away. So we sat there through the rain trying to watch this boy. And anyway, long story short, this boy got taken on. He got taken on as an apprentice footballer. Then he did his NVQ and he got 2 A's and a B in his NVQ. And he's now at university converting that to a degree. And that was a boy that was destined to fail as far as his school were concerned. And just because I said to him, just keep pushing, because you never know. You'll get to a point where you'll stop, but you keep pushing. And he did get signed up, and he's now been told that he will definitely play professionally in the lower leagues. How far he goes will be up to him, but he will play professional football, and that's.
And if you hadn't come into if you hadn't had this awareness that he's ADHD and you wasn't around, he would still be going back to prison.
Possibly he had been arrested, that one as well. All of those have been arrested. So he had been arrested. That one had been arrested for threats to kill and something else. I can't remember. But yes, all I did with them, all of them, and I still do, is make them believe in themselves. Because with ADHD, you can be anything you want. Richard Branson is a brilliant example. Well, Richard Branson went to prison at 17 for tax evasion or VAT evasion. He went to Brixton prison, I think it was, for 3 months or something. That hasn't stopped turning him into one of the biggest success stories in the entire world.
No.
Your ADHD can take you down some dodgy places, but that does not mean you can't come back and go the other direction.
Yeah.
And also, as I said to the footballer boy, your only passion is football. That's the only thing you love, eat, sleep, breathe, dream is football. So we've got to push you towards football as far as we can go. And if that does mean working in the coffee shop, so what? You'll still be at the football pitch all the time. And he was like, yeah, you're right. But because we pushed and because he went to that trial, and he got taken on. He was not the best footballer on the pitch that night. He really wasn't. But what he was the boy who ran more than any other. He was up and down that pitch. Wherever that ball was, he was. And he showed so much commitment. That's why they took him on, because they could see that he had the passion.
Yeah, and that's because that's what I'm learning at coaching at the moment is we need interest. So if we've got that interest, we will give it our all. But when we find that thing that we are interested in, and that can be, like you said, it could be a negative thing at times, but if it can be channeled in a positive way, we are going to try it so hard, the hardest person in the room, 100%. Because we are going to go for it, and that's all we're going to focus on.
Just one real ultra quick story. I had another teenager who was full of anger, full of rage. He was so angry about everything. And I kept saying to his mum, we've got to find what floats his boat. There will be something that will excite that boy, because he was very athletic, very energetic, very driven and powerful sort of person. But he didn't know where to put that power, And I said to her, we've just got to find it. We will. Well, we did find it eventually. It took about a year, 18 months. We found it. Boxing. And he now goes into London every single day, and he trains with an ex-Commonwealth champion boxer, and he's going to be a very good boxer, that boy, no question. He's very powerful. So you've just got to find it, whatever it is with ADHD. But I always say it doesn't matter if it's plumbing, pottery, poetry writing,
there'll be something.
There will be something that will excite that person enough, and they'll be very good at it.
And this is all the work that I'm focusing on, and loads of people are now, is how important it is with people with ADHD especially to hone in on their strengths and have a strength focused approach. How important is that? Because we have a real negative bias, don't we? You must see that all the time, because we've always been told we're rubbish or we're not good enough, and we don't think we are. So your approach sounds like that's what you do. So it's so important to have that approach.
I often use myself as the example, especially now I know that I'm moderate to severe ADHD, severe dyspraxia with 1% processing and 1% motor skills, sensory processing disorder, dyscalculia. Has it held me back? No. has it?
No.
I've got properties, I've got businesses, I've got charities. Hasn't held me back because I've got the passion. So I always say to people that we accept that ADHD comes with negatives, but so does it with the neurotypical people. Neurotypical people aren't brilliant at everything.
No.
You know, but with ADHD, we accept that there will be some negatives, but with the difference with us is that the positives, if it's something we're very passionate about, whether that's refugees, animals, homeless people, whatever it is, we will be more successful at that because we have the drive and the commitment and the passion that ADHD gives us. So I always tell people, I don't care what it is. I don't care if you're going to be a brilliant poet, you know, or a plumber. I don't care. But whatever you're going to do, you're going to be brilliant at it. We've just got to find that thing that floats your boat.
Yeah, your interest, your spark.
Yeah.
And so would you say, if you were to sum up, I mean, you can't really sum up ADHD, I don't think, but if you was to say the biggest strength you've seen with ADHD, I know we're all very different, but if you could say like there was one or two main strengths that you've seen or struggle that's been turned into a strength that you also see as a strength of ADHD, would you say passion is the one that you would?
Yes, I would, but I would also say not giving up. ADHD
resilience, would you say that?
Yeah, resilience. Yeah, they don't give up.
That's my one. I always say
yeah. That they don't give up, and we will find a way. I'm an example of that. When I was trained to be a counsellor, I can't do mornings. Long story. I've got this anticipation anxiety thing, which means if I have to do anything in the morning, I don't sleep the night before. Yeah. So when I was doing my counselling training, I moved colleges. I went to a total of four colleges because I could only do my counselling training in the evenings. And every time I was at a college, they went, right, the next course, the next level is days. You start at 9 o'clock. I thought, nah, not for me. I'll have to go somewhere else. So I went somewhere else. So it took me 3 or 4, I still can't think whether it's 3 or 4 colleges to do all my counselling training. But I qualified as a counsellor because I never gave up.
Once you want it,
always found one that did evenings because I knew I wanted to help people because I'd already worked in a prison by then. I'd already worked in one prison and I knew I wanted to help offenders and I wanted to do it professionally. So I was damn determined to finish my counselling training. But yes, it meant going to different colleges to do it. So what? I found a way.
And creative problem solving.
Yeah, I think that's one thing with ADHD people is I do stress here, though, there are some people that don't have this drive. I have a brother who's diagnosed inattentive ADHD. For inattentive ADHD, often they have a lot of the ideas, but they really struggle to put them into action because their procrastination, their lack of motivation, and their brain fog is a lot worse. So there are some people that this doesn't apply to, but the vast majority of ADHD people will always find something that literally feeds the adrenaline. And once they've found that, I always say to parents, let them go for it. They might not be what I've got one parent, for example, who really wanted her daughter to be a lawyer. Well, her daughter doesn't want to be a lawyer. She adores animals. She wants to work with animals. So I said, let her go on that vet route. You know, she's bright, so let her go on the vet route. Forget the lawyer route. And that's the main thing. I would say what the two main things with ADHD, if you want two main things, we will get over things and we will find a way. We always will. And also, I would say the compassion. There's a big caring and compassionate side with ADHD. We care more. We don't like bullies. We will fight for the underdog. We have that heightened sense of justice. So I think if I had to pick out two that appear a lot,
we could choose more. I just said
they're the two. Well, there's hundreds, and obviously the other thing I always say to people is that no two ADHD people are the same.
Once you've met one, you've only met one. You know,
you've met 100%. Because this is in my teacher's book. Because I put in my teacher's book, you might have worked with one ADHD kid and think you've cracked it. No, you haven't, because every single one is going to be totally different. I've worked with thousands and thousands now of ADHD people. I've never met two that are even faintly similar. Never. You know, they're all different. They've all got different levels of ADHD, different kinds, different presentations, different comorbidities, different personalities. They're always going to be different.
Can I ask you as well, something I just thought of, because when you were talking about the parent that wanted her daughter to be a lawyer, she didn't want to be a lawyer. She was interested in animals.
Yeah.
Obviously, our school system is very much like that, right? We are told what we've got to study, and if we don't get a certain grade across the board, then we're basically, no hope,
Yeah.
If you could make a change within the education system, I know you're saying about
screening,
being screened, but aside of that, how else would you make education and schooling and even corporate environments maybe more ADHD or neurotypical friendly, what would you suggest? Because obviously we're told to sit at a desk and we're told to not move and whatever.
Well,
so
the first thing I would do is by allowing people to drop subjects that they're not interested in.
Yeah.
So because for me, it was science and geography. I was lucky. I was allowed to give up science and geography at 13. I didn't have to do them for the last 2 years at school. And I was glad to see the back of both. Never been interested in science, never been interested in geography. So for the first thing would be to allow children to drop subjects that they are not good at, and also to have identified the comorbidities. So, for example, if my dyscalculia had been identified, I should have been allowed to drop maths. I got an ungraded for my maths O level because when I looked at the paper, I put my name and the date, looked at it, thought, oh God, that looks hard. I'm just not doing it. I just didn't do it. So all those hours I'd sat in maths, they'd have been much better off letting me do more hours in the subjects I was really good at, which was history, English, drama, all the creative, interesting stuff. But those wasted hours in maths would have been much better spent in
wasted time.
Would have been much better spent in history. So the first thing, obviously reasonable adjustments are needed at school. So timeout cards, all that sort of thing. But a big change that they could make quite easily would be to allow ADHD kids to drop the subjects that do not interest them, because you're never going to be good at those subjects. Never.
And focus on their strengths and make them feel good about what they're good at.
Yeah, absolutely. Rather than pushing and pushing and pushing a child. I'm a great example. Pushing and pushing and pushing maths at me when I just wasn't interested.
Yeah. And then you're made to feel so rubbish, and also that's just making them feel so rubbish that they think I might as well just give up on school altogether.
Yeah, well,
what's the point?
I was very lucky in that I had a very good English teacher and a very good history teacher, and I liked them and they liked me. So I was passionate about those classes and I got very good grades in both. And the maths teacher was horrible, didn't like her. So I didn't care that I didn't get my maths O level. And to be quite frank, has it ever affected me? No, never. I don't need maths O level. So that's the first big change. Allow kids to drop.
Couldn't agree more.
They just are never going to be interested in, because what teachers don't understand that with an ADHD brain, if the adrenaline, if the ADHD adrenaline doesn't flow for a subject, however much you ram it down their throats, it's never going to stick. They're never going to learn. No. They're not interested. They're just not interested. They don't want to know. So don't keep forcing it down their throats.
Because that's another thing I learned the other day as well. Well, I was, you already know it in yourself, but had the language to explain it after all these years, most people will go, oh, do the hardest thing first, get it out the way. ADHD brain does not work like that. It has to be sparked, doesn't it? And then it maybe once that ADHD brain is sparked with an interest in something they love, then maybe, sorting out a bit of filing that they need to do or whatever it is that's not the non-interesting thing, then maybe they would be able to do it after they've actually sparked their brain and done something of interest and they feel like, they're working on something that they actually enjoy. Whereas if you give them the hardest thing, the thing they don't like, and trying to force them to do it, they're just not going to do anything.
They just get overwhelmed and they can't cope.
Yeah.
So I think overwhelm
shutdown, isn't it? It's called
overwhelm is another thing that people don't take into account enough. I struggle with overwhelm a lot.
Yeah, me too.
And I many years ago in my 30s when I was running an employment agency, I was making a lot of money, and everybody and his dog was advising me to buy property. And I ended up with I think 5 properties at one time, and I was so overwhelmed by it. I remember lying in bed one night thinking it was either 17 or 19 toilets. I thought, I own 19 toilets. How am I ever going to keep 19 toilets? And I just got completely overwhelmed. I literally had a breakdown. I had a complete breakdown in my early 30s, and I flogged off all the property. I ended up with, I've still got 2, but I flogged off 3 or 4.
Well, that's it. You just give up on everything.
I could not cope. And I didn't know that was ADHD overwhelm, because obviously I was years off my ADHD diagnosis. I wasn't diagnosed until I was 52. This was in my 30s. So overwhelm is huge. And kids at school, going back to kids, they get overwhelmed. If they've got masses of homework and masses of subjects and half of it they're not interested in because it's subjects that just doesn't interest them, they'll get overwhelmed. And then what happens is they do nothing. Whereas if you remove,
and don't do nothing.
Remove those subjects that they found boring and just left them with the ones that they're interested in, and they're not so overwhelmed and they're interested, it's going to happen.
And let them break it down as well, because I've spoke to so many people and I really relate now looking back, is I was better in exams in some ways apart from the time blindness, but coursework and huge amounts of it, I've spoke to so many ADHDers that were like, I was so overwhelmed, couldn't get my head around it, until I left it to the last minute. you know, because it's not broken down into sprints or into shorter segments and stuff like that. Like, you know, there's so many things that you could do, like you say, that are seen as small things, really, and you could do it immediately. That would help them with things, wouldn't it?
You see, this goes back to the fact that teachers are not trained in ADHD. So it's not their fault that they don't know how to manage an ADHD person. It's not their fault.
But education is one, isn't it? Step one, like education is
step one. Well, for us, because I'm an ex-prison counsellor, because I've spent my 30 years working with ex-offenders on the outside, I was an ex-offender mentor for years, trying to keep ADHD people out of prison. This goes way back before my counselling days. Because I'm so passionate about the criminal justice system, that's always right up there for me. But equally, the education system, both of those are our top goals.
Because it'll stop them getting there.
Yeah,
exactly. Oh, you're doing, honestly, this is so incredible. And the fact is, you're already got a plan in place that you're already working on.
Yeah.
And you've got people involved, the right people. So there's so much hope out there.
Yeah.
And it sounds like if you've got a deadline as well, like you're not a deadline, but you're saying, oh, I think it'll be a year. Like, that's amazing, because at the moment, when you talk to anyone about anything ADHD, like diagnosis, they're like, oh, we don't know when, you know, blah, blah. So the fact is,
this is
you are really taking action, and you are doing powerful work.
Yeah, and I do it myself, because I mean, Bambos, lovely man, but I've been to meetings 5 years ago with Bambos. What's changed in 5 years? Sod all. And it's nothing to do with Bambos. It's because it's all great big committees, and it's all big reports.
It's so many, yeah.
Well,
and they've got a lot, and they've got a lot of different things. This is what I was saying, is they've got so many different things they're being dragged into at different times. So unless someone else, like campaigning or outside of that, is able to ask them, you know, chase up on actions, keep people accountable, they're getting lost in all these different other things. So it's really hard to know where they're at.
This is my vocation. So I will not rest until they are all screened in prisons and police stations for ADHD. That's why I'm saying that will happen this year. It'll happen this year in the police. The prisons will be slower, but it will happen in the prisons as well. But if we can get them caught in the police stations, that's great.
Yeah,
our
that's
ADHD
amazing.
Act, we will be going to different ministers this year, because all the working parties have done all their work. You know, the children's, the psychotherapists, the rehabs, the criminal justice. We've got 2 criminal justice working parties, 1 police, 1 prisons. We've done all these reports on what's wrong, what needs to change, and how it can be done at ministerial level. So we'll be going to the ministers this year with all this stuff. And then from this, we want the ADHD Act, because there's an Autism Act. There's no ADHD
Exactly
Act.
what I said.
So we will have an ADHD Act, and I won't stop until I'm finished, because this is my vocation. This is what will happen. And this is what I spend my life doing now. Head Stuff is massive now, but I've got an admin team of about 8 that run Head Stuff. I have very little to do with it now. It runs beautifully on its own, with all very committed people running it, which is fab. So I now focus on my books, because I've got the 2 books out, the one for parents, the one for teachers. The one on how to bring up ADHD teenagers is coming out later this year. And then next year is my book, The Prison Counsellor. Now, The Prison Counsellor, the byline for that one is heartbreaking stories of ADHD boys who ended up behind bars. And I've got all these very real life true stories, and they are heartbreakers, absolute heartbreakers, of why these boys ended up in prison. And it's also combined with my prison story. So the Prison Counsellor will be coming out next year, and that also will focus on the ridiculous amounts of ADHD in prison. So if this hasn't all changed by the time my book, The Prison Counsellor, comes out, which will be the big beginning of next year, I will be promoting that massively. I've got a book publicist that I use, and things will change then. But I think things would have changed by then, because we're doing all this with the police right now. Right now. And as you said, there are other people doing things. It's not happening quick enough for me.
No,
there are people sitting in prison today, right this minute now, with ADHD who shouldn't be there. You know, and I'm working at my speed, which is fast, because I want these changes now.
Everyone deserves to live and have the chance to live their life the way they were supposed to, turn up in this world the way they should have in the beginning. So we can't keep wasting all these people's lives when it can be different. The story can change, and that's the most powerful thing. Yeah, it doesn't have to be that way, and the domino effect it has on other people's lives.
That's interesting you say that, because I say in my teacher's book that ADHD people have as much right to be their authentic selves as anybody else born with any other sort of brain. They have the right, yeah.
Yes.
But where we go wrong in society is that we don't understand these ADHD brains.
No.
And we punish them, and we don't diagnose them, we don't medicate them, and teachers say, "Oh, there's nothing wrong with him. He's just
we don't think it's real." Loads of people don't think it's real still, and it's
exactly,
like, what?
There are still psychiatrists who don't think it's real.
Yeah.
And that destroys lives. And that's what's got to change. We've got to accept that it's a condition. It's the most easily medicated condition there is. We've got to accept that we've got to screen, assess, diagnose, and medicate. And that will change a lot of people's lives. And then they can be their authentic selves without getting into trouble with the police. That's the goal. You know,
I need to literally give you a round of applause. Like, honestly, this is it. This is exactly it.
And I know it's it because I know all these people, you know, because I've worked.
You've seen it with your own eyes. Your work has been that, and you've got the proof. And that's the thing. And this is not people going, "Oh, I think if we did this in the prison," you're like, "I've got these success stories, the ones you've just spoken about."
I saw one last night. Listen, I saw one last night. The smallest boy I saw last night was my first ever client in Aylesbury Prison. 10 years ago, I counselled him. He's now out. He's doing brilliantly. He's got a lovely girlfriend, 4-year-old daughter, and he works full time as a scaffolder, earning a lot of money, diagnosed on the meds. That's the change that happens if you get them diagnosed and medicated.
That is unbelievable. Can I ask you as well about this? Because obviously I know you spoke about medication a lot, and I think obviously by that point, medication is going to be the most effective treatment and powerful. But I've also been having conversations with people, doctors and scientists about the cerebellum and, like, you know, doing training around that, and they've had some really big success stories as well around even with autism, like people not being able to talk for 45 years doing this cerebellum training, and they've spoke for the first time at 45. Do you think I know you've got coaching, you do coaching and counselling, but do you think there's other things as well that you would incorporate aside from medication, or do you think medication is a must for people with ADHD?
Okay, well, don't forget I gave up science at 13, so it's not my favourite subject. But no, I do believe in alternative treatments for things.
That's what I was looking for.
Yeah, definitely I do. There are some kids who can't take medication, and I've had parents say, you know, what else do I do? And the answer to that is exercise. Yes. You know, when you get kids doing sport every day and they're getting their adrenaline from the sport and they're exhausted because they're getting their restlessness and their hyperactivity out. So the obvious answer to that is sport. For me, when I was younger, it was drama. If I was doing drama, I should do plays. I was a member of a drama group. I did acting at school. If I was performing and, you know, I've got a massive buzz from hearing audiences laugh. That was where I got my adrenaline, from being funny and getting people to, you know, like what I was doing in plays. So that was where I got mine. So yes, there are other ways of helping ADHD. I totally appreciate that. I mean, there are some people who cannot take medication. So
because isn't it 20% it doesn't work for sometimes?
Absolutely.
Or something like that?
Yeah. And I know people that take some phenomenal, some of my therapists, for example, take phenomenal supplements and vitamins and magnesium.
Yeah, I've heard this.
And they swear by it. So yeah, I'm not just saying it's only meds. My particular thing about meds is teenagers who are getting into trouble. Yeah. They're the ones who need meds to protect them, because the meds do allow them to stop being impulsive and to think of the consequences. So if a 13-year-old, we get this all the time with clients, a 13-year-old is getting into trouble, you know, bad trouble. And I say to the parents, is he medicated? Nearly always no. And I'm like, get him on the meds. That is the biggest thing that's going to protect him, even if it's only till he leaves school. Get him on him when he's in his teens. But no, there's tons of other ways of managing ADHD, and I think all of them are worth exploring. Yeah, the one thing I won't have, though, the one thing that I'm really anti is that ADHD is caused by trauma. That one.
Do you know what? That was my question to you. What do you think about that?
Can I swear? Can I swear mildly?
You can swear all you want. Everyone swears on you.
I think it's total bollocks, and it really annoys me. Anybody who says, "Oh, ADHD is from trauma," no, it's not. You know, I'm diagnosed with.
Why do you think? Why are you so strongly think that it's not?
Because it's genetic. Because every single child I have worked with, it's either in one or both of the parents, and they can see it in one or both of their parents. It's massively genetic. ADHD is not caused by trauma in my book. Not. That's not to say that you can't have both. because yes, you can. Because a lot of kids with ADHD are brought up in chaotic houses, ADHD parents.
So it
So of course
worsens,
you can
doesn't
have
it?
trauma.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
and I am diagnosed with complex PTSD myself. I know what my complex PTSD is. It's very separate to my ADHD traits. It's got there's no crossover, you know. The people that say ADHD is caused by trauma, that's the only ones I will clamp down on very hard.
Yeah.
It is not caused by trauma. Yes, you can have both. That's what I will say. But no, it's not caused by trauma.
Because this is someone else was saying on the podcast actually that if you can just separate what is the trauma and what is the ADHD and treat them separately as well, then that's
100%.
that's what you need to start doing, is unpicking it a bit.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm glad you meant that was one of my things to ask you actually, what you thought. And because I think as well, it is like we say, if you're born into just say a nourishing environment and you're born with ADHD, yes, you're still going to have ADHD, but the symptoms may be very different and show up very different. If you're born with ADHD and you're in chaotic environment, and things that are going on around you that aren't nourishing for you and aren't supporting you, then yes, your ADHD symptoms are going to worsen, but you've still both got ADHD. You're still both.
Yeah, I'm the same. I had a very, very strong-willed mother. And the reason, I never kicked off at school. I never skipped school once. I did my homework. I never smoked. I never did drugs. Why didn't I do any of those things? Because I had a mother at home who would have rollocked me and absolutely given me hell. So I was kept in line by a very, very strong-willed mother. A lot of the people at my school were doing that. They were going sleeping with boys at 13, getting pregnant at 14, doing drugs, staying out late, skipping school, all this, because nobody was bothered enough to stop them doing that. I had a mother who was bothered enough to stop me doing that and to make sure I did my O levels and make sure I went to college and make sure I went to work. When you work in the prisons and you talk to these boys, nearly all of them, and I mean nearly all of them, 9 out of 10 have got appalling backgrounds. There was the first prison I worked in, there was a boy, I think he was about 23, and he actually came up to me one day and he said quietly, Sarah, he said, I shouldn't be in here. He said, I come from a really good family. I've got a mum and a dad who work, and my sister, I've got a brother and sister and they both work. Well, I think his sister was a bank manager. And he said, I shouldn't be in here. He said, I realise now I think he was probably ADHD, this boy, but this was years before I knew. And he said, I'm talking to all these boys, and he said, they've all got reasons for being in here. Their backgrounds, you can so see why they're in here. I shouldn't be in here. I really shouldn't be in here. I don't belong in here. But you see, the vast majority of them, that was the natural route they were going to go.
Yeah.
I remember saying to one boy something about, he said something about when his nan said something to him. And I said, I like your nan. And he said, don't like her too much. She hit me over the head with a frying pan. I said, did she? And he said, yes. And he said, and she's been in prison. I said, when your nan's been in prison, and that's just natural that your nan's been in prison, of course it's natural for the grandson to end up in prison, because that's what the family do. They go to prison, they don't have, it massively comes down to your family and your structure and the input you've had as a child. It really does, as to whether you end up in prison or not, massively. That nearly everybody I've spoken to in prison, apart from that one boy, have had difficult starts. As I say, a lot of them have been in care, a lot of them have been adopted or fostered loads and loads of times, or they've had parents who were chaotic living, drug addicts, alcoholics, didn't make them go to school, didn't feed them. I've worked with a lot of very short people in prison, very short boys, because they weren't fed as kids. So they're like 5'6", 5'7". They never grew beyond that because they weren't getting the nutrients. Their parents weren't feeding them. Their parents were knocking back the sherry on the sofa and they didn't get their tea. It's tragic. This is what I mean about the tragic stories in prison. And all these parents are ADHD of these boys in prison. And nobody worked out they were ADHD either.
This is it, and that's the thing as well. Even if you think about it, not even to the extreme of what the stories you're saying there, but if you think about it, even of having an ADHD brain when no one even knows what an ADHD brain is, the fact that you need, because in your opinion, how different and how important is it to be surrounded by people that understand how your brain works if you've got ADHD and a supportive environment? Like, what difference does that make? Because even if you think about it on those terms, where people are unaware that their child even has that and they even have it. So how are you supposed to set up life for an ADHD brain if you don't even know it exists?
Well, I grew up obviously in a house where there was no knowledge or understanding of ADHD whatsoever.
Yeah.
And it was difficult because everything I did was wrong. I did everything too quickly. I didn't pay enough attention to things. One of the phrases my mother used to say over and over and over again was, why do you have to do everything in such a tearing hurry? And I thought I was doing everything at just normal speed because that was my speed. So for me, I've worked with trillions of parents, and I think a lot of kids these days are very lucky because they have got parents who understand. They've got parents who, you know, I mean, the amount of people who buy my book, you know, I get the most amazing lovely things said to me by parents who say, oh my God, I've read your book, we've put it all into practice, within a week our household has changed, we actually all like each other now. Oh, I've had you want to read the reviews on Amazon, there's loads of them saying it. You know, we've put everything into place.
Is this on Audible, by the way?
Yes, it's on Audible, Kindle and paperback. But that's what gives me my adrenaline buzz now, is when parents say, you know, a week ago we were all at each other's throats, we've now read your book, my husband's read it, we get it now, we've changed the way we talk to our son, he's happy, we're happy, everything's fabulous. You know, that thrills me to bits when I hear that, because I'm all about people understanding the brain. I had zero of it when I was growing up, zero.
Knowledge is power.
Yeah, knowledge is power. Knowledge
especially
is
of ADHD.
Kindness. Yeah. Knowledge is kindness. When you can, when someone's I used to drop things
understanding.
All the time. We now know that's because I've got severe dyspraxia. But every time I drop things before, it's, oh, for God's sake, why are you all so clumsy? If anyone's going to drop it, it's going to be you. If anyone's going to knock it over, it's going to be you. I grew up with that over and over and over. So had my parents had the knowledge that there was a genuine neurodiverse reason for all this, I'd have received a lot of kindness. And I like the fact that kids these days, and this is why I love it when people buy my book, I don't give a toss about the money that my book makes. I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in the fact that every time somebody buys a book, that's an ADHD kid understood more, you know, and the parents one, and at least one, if not more. And then the teachers one, that's a couple of kids in the class that get treated more kindly and more understood, that is their natural behaviour. They're not choosing to be naughty or restless or doodle or fiddle or kick their leg or swing on their chair. They're not choosing that. That's their brain. And I just want people to understand and be kind about it, you know, not to criticise it constantly. That's my goal.
And I always say, even if you could save a decade of their life, you know, like another 10 years, you know, 10 years, like that, say now 33 or 30, I found out. You found out at what age? You had ADHD?
I was a month off my 52nd birthday.
50, that's what I'm saying. So even if you can take a decade back, more than you know,
yeah,
they not have to go through the struggles for that long or unknownness. And would you agree with this statement? I read it in that ADHD 2.0. I don't know if you've ever read that by Ned Helliwell.
I've got it. I've started to read it, but of course I haven't finished it.
Really good. Yeah. It's one of my favourite on ADHD, actually. But he says ignorance is a public enemy number one when it comes to ADHD.
100%, and slash stigma, because even when people do think they understand it, there's still a dreadful stigma. I mean, I know some very senior medical people, I'm talking above psychiatrist level, senior medical people who are ADHD and dare not either get diagnosed or tell their bosses, because they know straight away that undermines their position. And that's in the UK. We're living in that situation now, where senior medical people dare not declare that they've got ADHD for the stigma. You know, the stigma is dreadful. Absolutely dreadful.
It is. I agree. How would you describe ADHD in one word?
If you asked me how would I describe ADHD, I would say amazing.
Amazing.
Because it can be amazing. It is amazing.
Yeah. With what do you say, with awareness and then building on your strengths, that
with knowledge,
life can be amazing.
With self-awareness and understanding what conditions you've got, what comorbidities you've got, it can be amazing. It's amazing.
Yeah,
you know, but equally it can be crippling. I get both ends of it, you know. I do know that it's not amazing for everyone.
I think for someone like you to say that, seeing you have probably seen some of the biggest struggles ADHD can bring and some of the most darkest struggles, you know, in your job. For you to stand there and say ADHD is amazing,
Mm.
is the biggest hope anyone could hear on this podcast.
Well, look at that. Look at the footballer who at school was told he was a piece of crap. He was going nowhere. Social services, youth offending services, all of them. I sat in meetings with all of them. They just said, "Oh, he's useless, hopeless. He's a waste of space. He's nightmare." But me saying to him, if you want to be a footballer, you keep pushing to see how far you can get. Because until you've pushed, until someone's gone, actually, no, you're a load of rubbish. You can't be a footballer. We don't even know how good you are. So let's keep pushing. And because I worked with that boy for about 18 months. Because I went, said, come on, let's go to this trial. Let's really find out if you are rubbish. Let's find out, and he wasn't rubbish. He got signed up. And then, you see, again, at school, he was failing everything, GCSEs, hopeless. He's gone on to get the equivalent of, I think it's the equivalent of 2 A levels, his BTEC NVQ thing. And he got 2 A's and a B. And he texted me that. He went, look at this, Sarah, 2 A's and a B. And I was nearly in tears. And I said, and don't you ever let anybody tell you can't achieve what you want to achieve. Don't you ever listen to them. You carry on. And he's now at my local university. And his mum said to me a couple of weeks ago, she said he wants to come and see you at the support group. I said, tell him I want to see him. I haven't seen him yet, but I will. Because I will give that boy the biggest hug. And I will tell him, you just bloody well keep on going. Don't let anybody tell you can't be what you want to be. And I've also said, when you get to Wembley, don't you dare forget me. I'm coming to you at Wembley. And he said, he's like, I won't, Sarah. I won't. I promise you I won't. He's going to be playing professional football within the next year, and he's going to have a degree from being told at school he would do nothing and get nowhere. And we had social services shut the book and walked out. When I was telling them that the school, I said, you're doing it all wrong, you need to change it, you're handling him completely the wrong way. If you talk to him like this, if you do this, the social service woman shut her book and walked out. And that was because the dad said to her, he said, well, with all due respect, love, he said, we've been doing everything you've said for the last 2 years and nothing's worked, has it? He said, why don't we give Sarah's what she's suggesting a go? Why don't we manage him this way? And she said, well, I'm obviously not needed here. Shut a book and walked off, because all she was telling the parents to do was traditional parenting stuff that wasn't working with this kid. I could relate to this kid because I understood his brain. And now he's at university. So to youth offending services and to the social services, quite frankly, because they didn't understand him at all. They'd have had him written off. They'd have had him in some hostel now, for the ones going nowhere. But he's massively achieving at university. The other one, the armed robber, he's at university training to be a lawyer. The one who was arrested 3 times, he's 4th or 5th year training to be a doctor. These kids, if you believe in them and you say, yes, I know you screwed up, but all 3 of those have been arrested. Let's not forget, all 3. But I also say, so Richard Branson, has he stopped him? You move on from it. You accept what you've done and you move on and you keep your eye on the prize, on what you want, and you will get there. And all 3 of them are. That's my top 3 that I use. But there's hundreds of others. But they're quite good examples because they'd all been arrested for quite serious things. But we overcame it. And we kept, even though they were terrified of what was going on with the police, we carried on pushing them towards whatever their dreams were. And they're all 3 achieving their dreams.
Thank you so much. Honestly, you are truly amazing. You are amazing. Like this is real work. This is real change. And thank you for doing what you're doing. I'm so inspired. And how can, if people who listen to this, and I'm definitely one of them, what can people do to help support you on your mission?
We've got, actually interesting, because a lot of people say that, they come and they go, oh, this is brilliant, we want to help. We've actually got like a help sheet. If you go onto our website and contact us and just say, how can I help? We've got a whole sheet of how you can raise money for the charity, how you can donate books to schools, there's loads of different ways that you can help. So go on our Head Stuff ADHD Therapy.
And I'll put the link put the link on the podcast as well and share it everywhere.
We can send you this list, because one of the ways is literally by donating a book, and we will send it into a school and say, please read this book and spread it amongst the teachers. So even like for 20 quid you could change a whole school just by getting the book sent into the school, and we will do that.
So your book into their school, you mean?
My book into their school. So if parents, we'll send it into the school their child's actually at if they want us to, but some people just go, no, look, it's 40 quid, in fact the Metropolitan Police did this recently. They said, here's 5 books, send them to the 5 most appalling schools when it comes to understanding ADHD. So we did a thing on Facebook, on one of the UK kids Facebook groups. I said, tell us your terrible stories about schools, lack of understanding. And we sent those 5 books off to those schools and said, please read this. This will help you understand your ADHD students. So there's loads of ways.
So that's something you can just, that's it. So
20 quid, you can change a school. Do you know what I mean?
That's how you're oh my God, I've just thought we're always talking on the podcast. So many people are saying the first thing they would change is educating teachers around ADHD. Well, there you go, 20 quid, and we can do that.
20 quid, we'll send a book into a school.
That's it.
With a letter saying,
there.
You will have ADHD children, you might not recognise it, but please read this book, then you'll be able to spot them. So we send it with a letter and everything. So there's loads of ways people get involved, but the easiest thing is to go on the website, send us a message and say, I want to get involved and I want to help ADHD, because people can get involved in the ADHD Act. We need people for that. We need people raising money for our charity, because our charity does amazing work keeping people out of prison, and sending the books. There's all sorts of ways people can help. So they're very welcome to get in touch.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you so much for your amazing work and time. Thank you so much for listening to Untangled. I hope you find these podcasts as useful as I do. I always leave feeling so inspired and like I've learned so much about my ADHD. I am here to prove to you that meditation does not have to be boring. It doesn't have to feel like a chore, and that you can have a regular meditation practice and bring all the benefits that come from meditation into your life. You can find these either via my Instagram, which is ADHD_Untangled, or on my website, untangledco.com. Let's get untangled and show the world what we are made of.